Okay, so how are these different theories conceiving of crime and deviance? कल की क्लास के अंदर we're going to look at functionalist and new right वगैरह के boys. आज के लिए we're going to look at हमारे conflict theorists. Okay, so
Okay.
I, I think Marxist के अंदर I think is going to become a pretty clear trend of like how do they conceive of things like this. What do you think? What is their perception of like crime and deviance?
So that probably working class tends to commit like more crime
Yeah,
and due to like relative deprivation and
sure. What else? अच्छा चलो व्हाट एल्स मैं बता दूंगा आप बस इसी को एनालाइज कर दो व्हाट डज दिस मीन वर्किंग क्लास कमिट्स क्राइम बिकॉज़ ऑफ रिलेटिव deprivation.
so this basically means that obviously because of the fact that working class people are sort of like material deprivation against material deprivation, and then they sort of like start comparing themselves with the people in working class, sorry, in middle class, and when an individual sees that he does not have, he or she does not have the things that middle class people are fortunate to have, they sort of like out of jealousy they use crime as a way to become equal to them, or sort of like get those things which the middle class or upper class people have.
Get to the same level. Yes, there's also like a more basic analysis to this, which is kind of somewhat more common in Marxist circles. It's the
Hmm.
fact that like it doesn't even have to be relative. So if you can't put food on the table, you will commit crimes to get it. Right? Like the idea being
Yeah.
like crimes are crimes so long as you can afford food. But the more important bit of like crime and deviance key understanding for Marxists is that crime and deviance are defined by the upper class
Yeah.
to maintain the upper class.
So can you also say like sort of like this trying to like maintain the capitalist
मुझे आपकी बहुत कम आवाज आ रही है। I think आपको माइक ज्यादा करीब बोलना
uh Sarah Bihari?
होगा और ज्यादा.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, that's
Okay, I
better.
just have to be
Yes.
a little louder. Yeah. So sir, can we take it in this sense also that basically the upper class makes such laws in order to, like maintain the capitalist society?
Yeah, 100%. So like that is what we are going to talk about, right?
Hmm.
The first instance of police was actually created to protect property, right? There's like times of rioting and protests, and the police as a force was invented so that people would stop breaking property because they were protesting their rights being taken away, right? Like, this is an interesting thing, right? Because already what we see is, okay, hey, this like kind of structure that we are seeing, the police system as a whole, is being created particularly to maintain capitalistic interests, right? How does this
Yeah.
actually happen, right? Well, this happens because A, the government is in the hands of the capitalists. Like this is Marxist theory, right? The government is in the hands of the capitalists, right? So government is run through capitalism because the people in government are either capitalists or they are funded by capitalists, or the economy relies on capitalists, right? Like that's the interesting thing you'll find out. Like that's how we kind of got to the current climate crisis, right? कि like जो आपके senators रहे हैं, when you like look at history, you find out कि like the kind of senators who like because scientists had been saying for like decades कि like climate change एक मसला बनने लगा है boys, कुछ कर लो इसके बारे में, right? The reason it
Yeah.
didn't happen was like just जब भी वो जाते थे सेनेट के पास to be like कि bro कुछ इस बारे में करो, the Senate was directly actually like the people in the Senate were directly funded by oil companies, oil manufacturers, coal mining companies, आपकी
Yeah.
like companies जो कि काम करती हैं actively in ensuring that the climate crisis happens basically,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
So that is basically what happened. Such a situation became so because law जो है वो हाथ में है capitalists के, right? जब law ही आपके हाथ में हो, then you're not necessarily going to be affected by law in the first place, right? You can always get
Yeah.
out of law so long as that is in your hands. Then, of course, there's the fact that, like, white collar crime.
So the white collar crimes is like majorly done by the middle class or the upper class? Because when I
So it's
noted it said
primarily
middle
actually done.
class.
Sorry, say that again.
Because where I read it, it said it was majorly done by the middle class, and I thought
Right.
it
So
was done by
there's
the upper class.
right. So there's an important bit of analysis we found. Give me a second. White collar crime is done by the middle class on a more individual level, but by the upper class
In the corporate level,
on a more
the
systemic
corporate.
level. Manike, when the upper class does it, it is built into the system and often, interestingly, allowed by law. Right? So, for instance, as an insurance company, it would be fair to say, like, hey, आपके ऊपर जो laws हैं, some of those should ensure that you are not allowed to mislead the people जिनके लिए आप insurance दे रहे हो, right? You are not allowed to spread misinformation about your insurance. In the same way as, like, if you are, let's say, a car manufacturer, it should be at some level illegal to probably sell faulty parts, right?
Yeah.
The interesting thing that insurance companies do at that point is insurance companies don't directly lie, they just don't tell their consumers the best way to access their insurance. Right? This is in every way lying. This is in every way misinformation, right? But this misinformation is completely allowed by like the law, right? फिर उसके अलावा, when the upper class needs to, let's say, do corruption, it's just put in their salaries. And the accountants are simply told to let that finance through. The finance is in the control of the capitalist in the first place. Technically, no law has been broken. Make sense?
Yeah.
When the middle class does it, it's basically like more explicit, right? वो डायरेक्टली स्कैम कर रहे होंगे लोगों को, वो डायरेक्टली करप्शन कर रहे होंगे, वो किसी अनफेयर चैनल के थ्रू, लीगल मींस के थ्रू अपने पास लेके आ रहे होंगे. The upper class does it in a lot more systemic ways.
Yeah.
Right? So
Makes sense,
that
yeah.
is something that like Marxists would point out, right? Then beyond that, what is the ideology of law itself? Well, the ideology of law is simply, okay, hey, you don't know how to act right. You cannot be a good person unless you are told to be one. In that sense, then, the police becomes a force that ensures conformity, and conformity is a tremendously big part of capitalism, right? Like worker conformity, workers बदतमीजियां ना करें, workers अपनी लाइन में रहे, workers अपने काम से काम रखें, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And then finally, the police is basically is a part of the repressive state apparatus, where the idea is okay, the point at which these people start revolting, the police will be there to ensure they don't. Right? Like examples of these look like, like recently in Pakistan, the Pashtun National Jargah happened on October 11th, and on October 8th, yeah, I think 9, something like that, 8 or 9. Open fire happened where the Jargah was supposed. Right? It was an act of protest, or वहां पे open fire हो गई to like make sure like the Jargah doesn't happen. Then, for instance,
So
currently,
they, so they,
sorry,
so they burnt that place like prior to the
नहीं, open fire does not mean burnt. Open fire means बस गोलियां चला देना, like खुली गोलियां चला देना, like
Oh, okay, so the people
bullets.
were already there.
हाँ, so like they were setting up like the protest की सारी चीजें, they were setting up camps and everything. People already live there, so they're creating like
Okay,
every
yeah.
पूरी situation, and then like वहां पे
Okay.
firing शुरू हो गया, right? Currently, Marang Baloch, who is a Baloch activist, is imprisoned following the Jafar Express train incident, right? Like, a bunch of army people were held hostage in a train by some Baloch groups who have been like demanding like Pakistan give them rights. Like, there was an active sort of act of protest against the state, right? Or uske through Marang Baloch, who's a Baloch activist, like perhaps the most famous current living Baloch activist is Marang Baloch. Marang Baloch was imprisoned after this, right? So the police becomes a part of the repressive state apparatus. Like the police is there to ensure that these people do not go out of line. So then, this is the Marxist analysis on crime and deviance. Their thing is that crime and deviance, like पहले बात तो वो हो गई like the working class commits more crime because of relative deprivation, and so we need to understand crime in that specific context, right? But the bigger, more important thing that they talk about is that hey, crime and deviance in the first place are defined by the upper class, right? Like working class people don't get to define what crime or deviance are in the first place, and that's perhaps a bit screwed because when the upper class is defining it, then of course they are going to define it in a way that creates allowances for their stuff to happen. So I'm sure you will have seen like Instagram, like generally these like clips of Mark Zuckerberg on the Senate वगैरह, where like Mark Zuckerberg से क्या कहते हैं उसको ग्रिल किया जा रहा है और उससे लोग सवालात पूछ रहे हैं कि भाई आपने कैसा सोशल मीडिया प्लेटफॉर्म बनाया जिसपे इतनी मिस इन्फॉर्मेशन होती है, आप इंस्टाग्राम चलाते हैं, इंस्टाग्राम की वजह से इतनी सारी लड़कियों को ईटिंग डिसऑर्डर्स हो गए हैं, लाइक इतनी घटिया सिचुएशन आपने क्रिएट कर दिया सोशल मीडिया की वजह से कुछ हो नहीं रहा, राइट? एंड द इंटरेस्टिंग थिंग इज कि लाइक दीस सेनेट हियरिंग्स जहाँ पे मार्क जकरबर्ग को बुलाया जाता है, दीज हैपन लाइक like हर कोई 3-4 साल, right? But the more interesting thing is like after them nothing really happens, right? Like America के अंदर particularly laws don't really end up getting passed जिसके through Facebook या Instagram becomes a safer space for the people who use these places जहाँ पे misinformation कम हो, right? Why doesn't it happen? Well, because Facebook puts a lot of money into lobbying. ये सारे के सारे सेनेट वाले एंड में बिके हुए होते हैं, राइट? लाइक ऑल ऑफ दिस हैपेंस एंड देन एंड में द बिल इज सपोज्ड टू बी पास्ड एंड इट डजंट गेट पास्ड because everyone votes no because the majority of the senate is directly in the hands of the capitalists, right? So like this repetitive system where like things don't really end up changing, and because crime is defined by the capitalists themselves. So चोरी करना crime है और murder करना crime है, right? However, white collar crime, जिससे like आप पूरे अपने populace के पैसे चोरी कर रहे हैं, वो उसका easy से, right? That's the kind of situation we're talking. Now, let's look at feminists. What do you think will be feminists' opinion on crime?
Where they basically men are the ones who mostly commit crimes, and a
Say
lot of
that louder. I'm sorry.
females. I'm saying that the men are the ones who are do commit crimes more. But when females like do commit crimes, feminists believe that they are treated more harshly uh, by the agents of social control because they it's not expected for a woman to do crime, and that's not really it doesn't really fit in the image that women have in society. So
Exactly, right? The great analysis. So, like, the idea basically being like, hey, here's the situation where, like, on a larger level, when it comes to just like the amount of murders that happen, like when it comes to, for instance, choriyan वगैरह, men have a larger tendency to commit these crimes. However, it's interesting to note what female prisons are like, right? So, like, what are female prisons like? Like, female prisons are these spaces where women are constantly told that committing crimes is bad, but it's particularly bad that you as a woman did it, right? There is this particular attention shown to this specific fact. Now, some interesting bit of analysis comes from this black feminist. We're going to talk about a bit more like critical race theory, but like Angela Davis. She talks about this in her book, Are Prisons Obsolete? And she basically suggests, like she gives this story, right? So like there was a lot of criticism about male treatment of women. Sorry, about male treatment, about like treatment of prisoners in male prisons, right? And the criticism was particularly posited in an understanding, like in contrast to female prisoners. For instance, one thing was like when male prisoners run away from prison, they are shot at. This did not apply for women, right? So now the interesting thing that happened was like this one liberal feminist senator. Remember, liberal feminists are all about working within the system. Yes,
yes.
one liberal feminist senator took notice of this and she said, this is bad, right? अब देखो, the reason this like argument was being made was to basically suggest कि like यार हम लोग अपने male prisoners को इतनी बुरी तरह क्यों treat कर रहे हैं, like why are we shooting at them for running away? It kind of makes sense to want to run away. Perhaps we should create a system that is more comfortable for them. We're going to talk about more like the prison system वगैरह वाला सारा का सारा stuff, like all of that, right? Like hey, let's create a system that's more comfortable for them. But the liberal feminists took it in a completely different direction. She said we should start shooting at the women also. She put in place bills that would ensure that exactly that happened, and she put in place bills at large which made sure that women were treated as horribly as men are in prisons. Right? So women in prisons would now be treated as horribly as men are treated in prisons. And her idea was basically is gender equality, right? Like so long as there is gender equality, like if we want gender equality, we must want it at our worst also. Right. And Angela Davis criticizes this. Angela Davis is a feminist herself. Angela
Yeah.
Davis criticizes this. She suggests that perhaps when we approach female rights, we should approach them within the context of male rights also. Sometimes both males and females are looking for the same rights. When it comes to being at the mercy of law,
Well,
females are also immensely oppressed by the prison system. Huh? This needs to be worked out. Sorry, आप कुछ कह रही हो?
no.
Sorry?
No, so I'm really sorry. There's people talking in my background.
Oh, no worries, no worries, no worries. Okay, huh. So Angela Davis is basically like creating this larger context of like, this like awful situation. Like just because there's this idea of like, oh, we should have gender equality, we end up treating women horribly as well. She's basically like, okay, like in the context of the prison system, perhaps we should look at all of these people in a more similar way. Right? Then there is the context of like female crime, right? Like what kind of crime are women often guilty of committing, right? Well, important bits of like female crime that's like particularly important for feminists is like women killing their husbands. Ye wali vibes, right? So like okay, women killing their husbands is a particularly important bit of female crime because it is specifically gendered. And so feminists iske andar give the kind of analysis that Marxists give to crime in the context of class as well, right? They're basically like, okay, sure, one way to look at this is, wow, how awful that a woman killed her husband. So sad. However, another way to approach this,
You should find out what the husband did.
not just what the husband did, it's like killing someone is a massive thing, right? I think we never really tend to
Yeah.
understand like killing हम मीडिया में ज्यादा देखते हैं. It's like it थोड़ा सा हमारे लिए वो हो जाता है आसान हो जाता है killing को digest करना. Like killing is a massive thing. You are taking away someone's life, someone you specifically knew, and it is kind of like all else aside, it's kind of just difficult. Like आप बस एक बार चाकू मारते हैं, very often नहीं मरते, right? It takes a lot of
Yeah.
planning, a lot goes into it. Killing someone is a big deal. Right.
Yep.
So feminists are like, let's question this. What is happening such that women are comfortable going through not just the emotional, but also the logistical turmoil of murder? Hey, it's a big deal. Like, why are they doing this in the first place? And they're like, okay, like
Yeah.
you put someone in a larger patriarchal structure which strips them of all meaning of self beyond their like beyond the context of their marriage, their being a daughter, their being a mother. These people don't have interests anymore. These people don't have friends often. And now, like usually, like killing usually happens the point at which, like, something specific happens, right? It's very often a straw that broke the camel's back valley situation. Like, and then after that, the man, let's say, beats their daughter up, beats the wife up, assaults, like sexually assaults, perhaps let's say cheats on the wife. There's a big reason for like why women end up killing their husbands. Like infidelity
Yeah.
is often a big reason, right? So at that point, then what's happened is this is too far. This crime, hence, cannot be disconnected from the larger gendered existence that these women uh, live within. We cannot simply suggest that these are bad women. We also cannot simply suggest that these are exceptions and not the rule. They are a reflection of a system that is built upon the disenfranchisement of women. Yes, like there is a system
Yes.
that is created to ensure that women are constantly oppressed. And in such a world, in a world where women are supposed to be oppressed, female crime does not end up being like that immensely sort of outrageous of a thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Finally, we're going to come to critical race. So, critical race theory, once again, largely takes place in the context of, the civil rights movement. It's particularly a lot of Black writers, some Latin American writers. It's like critical theory. They're particularly talking about how like ethnicities shape our existences and how people are
Yeah.
oppressed because of their ethnicities. So,
Oh.
critical race,
Yeah.
critical race theory के अंदर we are going to look at the पहले restorative justice की theories, right? So, what we have right now is something we call retributive justice. Retributive justice is built upon punitive action, which is basically someone did something wrong, they deserve punishment, right? A, on a moral level, उसने कुछ बुरा किया तो उसको पनिश करना जरूरी है, एंड बी टू डिटर अदर्स, राइट? कि उन्हें पता चल जाए कि भाई मैं कुछ बुरा नहीं करता, क्योंकि अगर कुछ बुरा कर देंगे तो फिर ये जेल वाले गोली मार देते हैं, ये फांसी पे लटका देते हैं, ये वाले सीन्स नहीं करते, राइट? सो लाइक this is the two reasons retributive justice exists. Critical race theorists argue against this. They believe that justice should be restorative, which means it should restore the victim as well as the offender, right? So, like, they're understanding once again the offender as someone who is a fellow, who is a reflection of the larger context they are within, right? Who perhaps does not understand the hurt that they have caused, and who we should give therapy to. We should ensure that they go back to a world where they do not commit the same kinds of crimes again, right? So we should work on restoring them, making them a healthy part of the community. In term on like on the level of the victim, we should make sure that we give them the kind of therapy they need as well, but also we give them the space to understand the offender, to understand what happened, and potentially create a space where they can also be restored. Because वही वाली vibe होती है ना, it's like okay, आपको गुस्सा आ रहा है because someone did you wrong, अब आपने उसका कत्ल करवा दिया, but then वो तो मर गया, where do you put all of this hurt? Right? Like you are still
Yeah.
immensely hurt by everything that has happened to you, right? Like where do you put all of this hurt? And like through psychological study, through like study of like more indigenous methods of justice, we found out, okay, hey, actually the things that do kind of work a lot more often is when we make sure that these people sit down and talk about it. Like they sit face to face and they talk about everything that happened, right? And that sort of brings them to this sense of comfort where they understand that the person who hurt them knows the hurt they caused and is asking for forgiveness, and then they are able to forgive that person, they are able to get that weight off their chest. On the other hand, आपने 10 साल के लिए किसी को जेल में डाल दिया, does that really solve the issue? Does that really deal with the kind of hurt you are, right?
Yes.
Then there's the 13th Amendment stuff, right? So like the 13th Amendment is the amendment through which slavery was abolished. This is going to be directly in line with the prison system. It was abolished, right? However, specifically, it says involuntary servitude and slavery, right? So here's the interesting thing that happened, right? Is the involuntary is the important word here. In America, prisoners are put into enforced labor, and the idea is that because they have committed this crime, they should have to do this labor. The interesting thing is that Black Americans are arrested on drug charges at higher rates than white Americans, even though white Americans use drugs more often, right? It's like this disproportionate arresting, right? On top of this, Black Americans get higher charges for drug related crimes than white Americans. Like a bunch of these are, by the way, a bunch of these are false charges. So what basically ends up happening is a lot of Black people are put into enforced labor for crime that either they didn't commit or wasn't that bad. Like by the state's own definition, considering कि white लोग जब करते हैं तो वो उन्हें हल्का फुल्का सा वो कर देता है, जब black लोग करते हैं तो उसको intensely वो करते हैं. Like by their own definition, this is not like the worst crime of all time, right? Like a lot of Black people are then put into enforced labor for crime that they either did not commit or either it was not that bad of a crime in the first place, right? This is basically slavery.
Yeah.
So critical race theorists argue that the prison system exists to maintain slavery, right? The 13th Amendment has created space through which slavery can still persist. And that is why आज भी America के अंदर slavery does persist, right? What it looks like is like, higher policing in Black neighborhoods. Then on top of that, creating conditions for Black people where drug use becomes more common, right? So, for instance, you put Black people in a neighborhood where क्या कहते हैं, development doesn't happen, so not many jobs, not the best schools, etc. Well, what's going to happen at this point? Crime is probably going to become a bigger problem. Right? People don't have jobs, they don't have an education. You have to put food on the table once again. Crime is going to become a big problem. People are going to be constantly stressed. And probably then the stress is going to result in drug seeking behavior.
Right.
Hey, like this is why most people sort of get addicted to drugs in the first place, because they're in the kind of situation where, like, this is the only thing that they feel like this is gonna give me comfort, right? It's a coping mechanism. So you put these people in a drug seeking behavior. आप उन्हें पुलिस ज्यादा हेविली करते हो. The point at which आप उन्हें पुलिस ज्यादा हेविली करते हो, उन्हें अरेस्ट ज्यादा जोर से करते हो, अरेस्ट ज्यादा जोर करते हो, अरेस्ट ज्यादा टाइम के लिए करते हो, और फिर उन्हें इनफोर्स लेबर में डाल देते हो. This is slavery, right? And like when we say like you put Black people in a neighborhood, this is a real history, right? So like इसको हम redlining कहते हैं. So after World War II, a bunch of American suburban programs started. One big example is Levittown, right? It's like the American government directly funded Levittown. The catch was they were not allowed to sell to black people. It was created specifically for war veterans, but the black war veterans were not allowed in. Right? So, like, of course, it generationally chalta rehta, right? World War II is not immensely old. It is less than 100 years old, right? Like, I'm sure आप 80 साल के 70 साल के लोगों को जानती होगी शायद लोग. So, at that point, then, what ends up happening is over generations, black people are centered in one neighborhood, which is not heavily funded to begin with. White people are put in developed neighborhoods. Put this on a 80-year treadmill. You have modern American systemic racism, right? और फिर आपके 13th Amendment वाला पूरा मसला आ जाता है. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, this class is going to end in less than 1 minute, so it's probably going to end mid-sentence, but that's primarily it. कोई आपका सवाल हो तो आप ग्रुप पे भेज देना. I can answer that. And tomorrow we're going to continue with crime and deviance. आप पढ़ना एक बार और मुझसे पूछ लेना कोई से भी अगर सवाल आते हो. We can look at them in tomorrow's class. Okay?
Okay, sir.
All right, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much, Shiloh. I'll see you in tomorrow's class.